chose to set her spiritual suite, originally set for piano for wind ensemble. It's cast in 3 movements, written in between the 1930s and 1940s. The first movement is entitled The Valley of the Bones, based on the spiritual Dry Bones. There's also a version published for soprano and piano as well. The second movement is called The Bells, and it's based on the spiritual Peter Go Ring Dem Bells. And unfortunately, she wrote an entire symphony based on this, but sadly it's in manuscript and it is lost at this point. And the third movement is entitled Troubled Water, based on the spiritual Wade in the Water. And as of 2023, there's also a version published for cello and piano as well that is available for purchase. And she also wrote a version for orchestra, but unfortunately it's also lost and unavailable. In addition to Bonds being a very skilled composer, she was also a concert pianist, as I previously mentioned. So here's a concert program from 1962. You can see she was playing a program of her own music. And you can see that the third movement of the spiritual suite was initially called Group Dance, because it was actually encouraged that folks in the audience join in singing Wade in the Water. And she later revised it to be entitled Troubled Water. And I'm going to let Margaret Bonds actually talk about sort of the origin or the role that spiritual suite says and plays in her output. This is from the manuscript that I got from the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago. And she writes, "When I was a little girl, I never missed a concert of Mary Anderson, Roland Hayes, and Abby Mitchell. I was always thrilled by their singing of spirituals at the end of each concert. Audiences were thrilled too, Chicago. So I felt cheated and wanted some spirituals at the ends of my concerts too. I learned some settings of African folk songs of Coleridge Taylor and some of his spirituals, but they didn't have enough of the American gospel feeling. I began to experiment for myself and set several for the piano. Through many writings, the spiritual Wade in the Water has become Troubled Water. Though not as yet published, it has met with success when performed. It is a part of a suite for piano, was used in a ballet entitled The Migration, choreography by Taylor Beatty, the Young Men's Hebrew Association. It has been performed at Town Hall by me, by Joan Hawley, in Maryland by cellist Kermit Moore, and next summer is to be performed at the Watergate in Washington, D.C. by Symphony Orchestra. The Fisk Jubilee Singers performed it with voices and piano at 126 concerts throughout Europe. Margaret Bonds, January 31st, 1965. Langston Hughes, leader of the Harlem Renaissance, poet, social activist, novelist, also championed the work. And he writes, "The dynamic forces of these old songs transposed into piano terms makes for exciting listening. With Dry Bones, Margaret Bonds creates the loneliness of a graveyard. Then the trumpet call, the bones rising, seeking out their mating parts, knitting together to an almost boogie rhythm. Finally, the completed frames dancing, ending on that triumphant note of that great getting up morning." The most stirring of the 4 variations on the spirituals, which I heard Miss Bonds do, is her Wade in the Water. The sounds that emerged from the piano then took on the force of the whole upward march of our people through bondage, trouble, and sorrow to the light of day. I have seldom been so moved by any music in a concert hall. Just talking a little bit philosophically about the arrangement, I sort of struggled with trying to understand transcription, translation, adaptation, arrangement, and sort of how to navigate this. So I just want to share a few examples, but I don't pretend that this is any sort of definitive edition. I unfortunately can't know how Miss Bonds would have done it if she were to score this for band. She was a student at Northwestern, so I wonder if when she was going to a composition lesson, she could have heard Glenn Cliff Bainham's band rehearsing, but unfortunately I have no proof of that. It's just something that I've wondered about. But I do want to share an example, and the way that I eventually landed on this was trying to essentially score the way in the work in the way that I think is the most compelling. So I'll show you an example of that. So here's the original. This is from Michelle Cahn's CD Revival on faculty at Curtis. Here's her playing the first 8 bars of the first movement. So I want to show just an early draft of the first 8 bars. I think this is how I had it set back in May or sometime at the midpoint of last year. And I tried to be really faithful to the way that Miss Bonds originally wrote it. So you can see flutes written a due, the vibraphone, clarinet, all in the same sounding octave. You can see I tried to replicate the piano doublings, the octave doublings, so I used the piccolo, which sounds an octave higher, bass line represented in the bassoon and in the low saxophones, and then the percussion used towards the end to create a little bit of a sense of climax. So here's just the MIDI of the early scoring of the first 8 bars of the first movement. So I think it works, but I'll be honest, I was on the bus, we were in Carnegie going from JFK to the hotel, and I was sitting next to Dave Biedenbender, and he basically asked me, I mean, first of all, he agreed to let me open my laptop and show him what I was working on. And we just started to knock around the idea of, why does it have to be so exactly faithful to the original piano? And, pianists, they're always adding octave doublings and things, so maybe there's some ways to pare back the orchestration to actually use it to develop this opening music. So here's the final version. Just a few things to note. You can see the opening octaves have been stripped away, so it's simply solo clarinet. Low saxophone is stripped away, so those opening fifths are now only in the bassoon. Double bass hits in just that F pedal. You can see the vibraphone, which had the entire melody on this opening version. Also, the key is different. Maybe that's relevant to mention too at this point, but I'm putting it in a slightly more band-friendly key. I'll get to that later. But the vibraphone has been really pared down as well. Eventually the flute gets layered in, and then eventually the piccolo gets layered in as well with the glockenspiel, so we've got the extra octaves added towards the very end. Pedal added in the tenor saxophone. I'll talk a little bit more about the piano part later as well, but I just want to play for you. So this is now switching to UTW, also pardon the key change, but this is the final version, or at least the final version as of today, of these opening 8 bars. So the orchestration does a lot more favors towards creating an arrival towards the very end of the 8th bar. It allows the clarinet player to play more soloistically because it really is a solo. So is it an exact transcription? Maybe no, but I think that the adaptation really works in trying to just convey the music as intentionally and as high of a quality as I could do. Not too much to say about the instrumentation. I'll say too that I made a bunch of edits after this version, after the original version, so what you're looking at now is what is available for other ensembles to play, and I'm really grateful that there's been some other performances of the work and a few performances upcoming. One of the goals as well with the arrangement was to try to figure out a way to make it as approachable as possible to as many ensembles as possible. So you'll see there's no harp, there's no contrabassoon, contrabass clarinet. I just tried to make it as wide, if it's friendly as possible to as many ensembles. So there were some choices of the instrumentation as well. Originally I didn't have a piano part because I thought it'd be cheating to do a transcription from piano and then include piano at the very end. For this more final version though, I'll say that I did add a piano part just because there's a few moments that are pretty thinly scored, so I thought that could help add some reinforcement. But also if ensembles staffed a pianist and they wanted them to be involved, I thought that could potentially be a benefit too. Beyond that though, pretty standard fare. I don't think there's anything that needs to be addressed. It may be worth just briefly in the saxophones. I also debated doing soprano, alto, tenor, bass versus 2 altos, but eventually just settled on doing 2 alto saxophones just because I thought if it was a larger symphonic band, it would be more proportional to have that split versus just having one soprano. Thanks, TJ. Oops. Okay, so now I'm just going to get into some specifics about each of the movements. So I'm going to start by talking about the first movement, the Valley of the Bones. Just a few just minor things to mention. Originally, as I'm sure you already heard, it was set in G minor and then moving to G major. I lowered it a half step to F minor, F major, just to make it a little bit more band friendly. And I think I have a slide for this. You'll see that she marks it in common time. I originally had this, but the harmonic rhythm is to the half note, and I think you would just agree that the feel is to the half note. So originally I left it in common time out of respect for her and marked it in 2 in the top left. And then I realized that respect to all musicians, but nobody actually reads what is written in the top left, so I thought that was stupid. So I just revised, in the new version it's just in cut time now, which I think is just more friendly to the musicians. Beyond that, I think that's it. Maybe it's worth mentioning too, if you take a look, there's no tempo on the top left, and there's also no clear indication about what's played swing style and what's played straight, which is sort of a big thing that I wrestled with during this movement. So I have a few clips to share with you as well on this. And just a few little headings from the score, but you can see, I added Dolce in 2, Mark moved it into cut time, I added some rallentandos. All of these are in line with that performance by Michelle Can, performance by Samantha Ege, performance by William Chapman Meow, these different professional recordings of the Spiritual Suite. Made some instructions in terms of what to play swing, what to play straight, even though I definitely wavered on that for a while. So this is the section that I want to talk about in this first movement. So this is the cataloging of the bones in the dry bones, so the hip bones connected to, etc. So I'm just going to start by playing Michelle Can, this is the first performance that I heard of this section, and this is Miss Bonds' original manuscript. So I'll go ahead and play this, and then we'll talk about sort of swing versus straight style. Non-swung. Not that I feel like this is wrong by any means, but I guess I always just wondered what it would sound like for it to be swung, and then as I did more digging, I was able to go ahead and find some examples. So these are the Delta Rhythm Boys. This came after, so it's not like she was influenced by this video or anything, but I wanted to play another clip. This is them doing that same section of dry bones, the cataloging of the bones, and you can hear that it's swung style. And just one or two other just short clips to share. I mentioned him before, this is William Chapman Meow. This is his performance of Margaret Bonds' Spiritual Suite, and I'll let you listen to how he plays it. So definitely helpful, and this is a video that I found before I finished the first movement. But in some ways, the most liberating was actually when I was able to actually hear a recording of Margaret Bonds playing this, which came way after I was able to finish it. But I felt very vindicated in my choice. So this is an old recording. This is from the 50s, and it's been restored, so it's hard to make it out. But you can listen to her play this section from Dry Bones. I don't unfortunately have the time to play the entire recording, but she actually swings a lot of the music before this too, so that's actually made me wonder if it's worth to go back and make some edits too. But she definitely approaches what to play swung and what to play straight, not necessarily in marriage with the way that she notates it, because after this come triplets and things. So finally, here's the final version of the scoring. A few other things to note as well. Dr. Grantham encouraged me to bring out, or sort of score out the dry bones theme and add a little bit more of a solo on top of that. So you'll hear the trumpet player starts with the 4-note dee-dun-dun-dun in the band key, but then it sort of gets spun out into this trumpet solo that I tried to write in a way that feels stylistically correct. So it should hopefully feel like it could have been Miss Bonds, actually the one that wrote it. However, I tried to make sure the dee-dun-dun-dun, that 4-note motive is always found. So it's the trumpet solo starts with it, you'll hear it later up in the clarinet in the top right corner, the clarinet joins in, and then finally it switches over to muted trumpet so you get a little bit of a color change. So I tried to do the best of both worlds in terms of making sure that that motive was clear while making it engaging and listening to. So here is our cataloging of the bones. This is the YouTube Ensemble performance from October. So that was probably the section of the first movement that gave me the most angst in terms of figuring out how to score, but that'll cover it for movement 1. And now we're going to jump on movement 2. So this is the bells based on the spiritual Peter Go-Rain bells. A few things to know. Originally, and you'll hear this in the piano, it's set in C major, E flat major, here we go. C major, E flat major, then it returns to C major. I shifted it down a whole step so it would move into B flat, D flat, and then B flat major. You can also see too, the tempo. You'll see on the bottom right, this is from the Louise Topin version published in 2020. There's no tempo. It's so hard to know. On the top left, on the manuscript, it looks like half note equals 56, but it's not in the same pen as the original, so this could have been some student, or maybe it was from Miss Bonds, or so. There's really no way to verify it, but I think we marked it about 50 or so, and then eventually it shifts into this waltz in the middle part of the section, which is what we're going to be talking about. And this is the section that gave me the most strife. So I'm just going to start by playing. This is now, we're shifting to Samantha Ege. This is a live recording from the Chicago Black Renaissance Lives and Legacies. Here's the waltz section from her performance. I'm sure you're hearing by now, with all these piano performances, there's way more rubato than is feasible to add when you're working with an ensemble of 40 plus musicians. Okay, so just a few things to share about the waltz. Number one, something that I struggled with was the fact that since the piano has so much more rapid decay than wind instruments, when you listen to it played on the piano, I feel like that the melody is hidden a lot more than I scored out. I wrestled that for a while. I tried to figure out maybe if I made the note value shorter, maybe if I wrote it in the mallet percussion, something that has a little bit more decay. But you'll hear that the trombone solo and then leading into low brass and then into the horns, the melody is much more to the fore. So that's a little bit of a disconnect, I think, between what she wrote and the way that I scored it. The other thing that I did was, since it's so sparse, all of that piano writing, I definitely felt like I had to add something in order to make it successful and make it work for an ensemble. So first of all, you'll hear drum set throughout. I also moved the melody up an octave, and that's because to add some sense of orchestration and development. It starts with solo trombone, and then it layers in with second and third trombone, euphonium, and then eventually shifts into horns. And these are just, I just used her sketch of the harmony to figure out what the chord progression is, and then I just scored that into the low brass. So I think that develops pretty well. And I'll play for you the final version of the waltz. I don't think there's anything else to add this. Here we go. So I think I adjusted the textures a little bit, but I'm pretty pleased with how this eventually got scored out. And I mean, I realized that it sort of climaxes, you know, on this half cadence and then tapers, but I hope that you'd be pleased with the way that this was scored. Next section I want to talk about briefly, this is just the end of the second movement, and we'll go back to the Samantha Ege recording on this as well, just to show. Here's another moment where, you know, she's writing octaves throughout. You'll see a doubled fortissimo. That is also what matches the manuscript as well. But this is another section of the music where I really pulled it down, and it starts with just, you'll hear in a moment, just solo trumpet, and then layers in more voices. But I'll just start by playing, here's the concluding section of the second movement of the transcription, excuse me, of the piano original. Just a few more things to note here as well. Of course, Samantha Ege is playing it not just, you know, all fortissimo throughout, she's playing with a lot more sensitivity. So when I went back and scored it for wind ensemble, I tried to approach it in the same way. You know, there's no ritardando or anything, but obviously the music is calling her to do that, so I ended up adding that as well to the wind ensemble version. So here's the wind ensemble version. You'll hear it starts with just a solo instrument, and then it sort of grows in intensity. I also added harmony, so instead of just having, I mean, obviously pianists are limited to 10 fingers, you know, so I tried to score it out in a way that would hopefully be congruent with what she would have done with this instrumentation. And then the other thing that I really wrestled with is on the last chord, should it swell or should it decay? I chose to have it swell. I'll say that Miss Bonds doesn't have like a tremolo or anything at the very end, so maybe that's slightly at odds with what she was doing, but knowing that this was called The Bells, I thought that this would be a great opportunity to have sort of a large, impactful ending. So I'll play it for you and let you decide if you feel like it's effective. But here's the end to the wind ensemble version, just in a slightly different key. As I was putting this together over the past week, I mean, I'm still catching things, like I'm curious why I didn't include the double bass in these other statements of that bass line, so that's definitely an edit. Also, I don't know if it's Wyatt or Ethan, but someone did a crescendo at the very end in the brasses that I think works really well, so that could be something that could be added in. And then TJ and I discussed this tremolo on the chimes. I mean, he played it very sensitively in the October concert, but I heard a performance of it where the chimes player was really going for it, and I wonder if that's potentially a revision I should consider too at the very end of this movement. So, just a few thoughts on the second movement. And here is the third movement. So this is Troubled Water based on the spiritual weight of the water. Here is just a little bit of a screen grab from the manuscript. This is what I got from the Center for Black Music Research. And this is also from their archives as well. This is the published version from Sam Fox. This is the only thing that was published in her lifetime from the suite. This was published in 1967, as I previously mentioned. I'm excited to share that the wind ensemble version also includes some cool licks from the version for cello as well. So when I A/B it between the piano version and the version for cello, hopefully you hear some spots that you quite enjoy too that stand out. You'll see too, once again, in the manuscript there's no tempo. I don't know if she marked it as 138 or that was a publisher decision. Most people choose to take it somewhere around there, so that's where I ended up marking it for the wind ensemble version. And here's just a large swath of the end of the third movement of the spiritual suite. So just a few things, then I'll go ahead and play the wind ensemble version to the end. First, the fact that wind players can sustain way longer than piano, so you'll hear a lot more opportunities to use either pedal point or inverted pedal point towards the very end, so there's lots of sustains that help. Also, it's kind of fun, instead of always writing the grace notes as pitched grace notes, there's some roughs that you'll hear in the percussion as well that I think kind of adds a cool color instead of just having the pitches. You'll also hear an excerpt where the melody is played with two solo trumpets with Harmon mutes doing the wah effect. This was a Will Palladino tip, but I think it's cool because in some ways I feel like it harkens back to Miss Bonds trying to encourage the audience to actually sing, so I feel like it does a pretty good job with the wah of actually imitating the human voice and imitating that song-like sound. You'll also hear too, she, in the end of the third movement, of course you heard that she marks a lot of it at the same dynamic, and it has a lot of octave doubling. So once again, I pared that back and then tried to use the opportunity to crescendo through the orchestration as well. And then some of the opening fifths, if I could just go back to this last slide. Oops, not yet. Like, some of these things are just not idiomatic to wind parts, so changing that to like scalar music obviously works a lot better than it would work for a pianist. So I'll go ahead and play, here's the wind ensemble performance from October of the concluding section of the third movement. So just a few things to conclude with. First, I just wanted to share that album art. These are the 3 CDs that I referenced. These are the professional recordings of the Spiritual Suite for piano by, of course, 3 distinct pianists. And then 2, here's some printed resources. John Michael Cooper teaches at Southwestern University, just 20 minutes up the road, and he's one of the leading Margaret Bonds scholars, so it's pretty cool that he's super accessible right to us. And then Samantha Ege, who's also a pianist that I mentioned on a previous slide, she does a lot of research on Margaret Bonds as well, so lots of resources there. And then finally, just my thank yous, if I can go through these super quickly. So of course, thank you so much to my committee for being here and supporting my work. I really appreciate that, so thanks for being here. I also want to thank Dave Bienbender and Viet Quang that were just super helpful in terms of like meeting with me via Zoom over the summer and just helping this be as good as it can be, because it certainly wouldn't be without their input and guidance. So I'm really, really grateful to have them as mentors. I also want to thank TJ Anderson and Adrian Sims. TJ did a lot of work with helping me make the profession as good as it can be, so I'm really grateful for your help and for your guidance and for our friendship. And Adrian was super helpful with the engraving and the typesetting, and I mean, he's the best in the business as far as I'm concerned, so I'm glad that he was willing to give me so many notes. Thanks to T. Richardson, this is Margaret Bonds' nephew, who's enabled this project to come to be. He's been really instrumental in terms of authorizing a distribution agreement. He's just been accessible and a great resource to me. So this wouldn't have happened, this wouldn't be available for other people to play if he didn't actively encourage folks to champion Margaret Bonds' music. Also, a lot of these resources were from the Center for Black Music Research, and Heidi Marshall, she's the one that connected with the manuscripts and was able to send those to me. So I'm grateful to her. Michael Cooper, Hildegard Publishing Company, one of my best friends, Michelle Baker, she helped with a lot of this artwork for this and for other projects as well, so I'm grateful for her. 24 friends that proofread these parts. Before I gave them to the Wind Ensemble, I sent every part to a player in UTW, and I said, please play through this and let me know, and boy did they. So I made plenty of edits to just make sure all the parts worked and were idiomatic, so I'm really grateful for them to take their time to go through that. Thank you so much to the band faculty for being here and for your constant guidance and support. I'm really grateful. I mean, it's sad to sort of cap off my past 3 years, but I would not have spent my 3 years anywhere else doing anything else but being here. So I'm just really grateful to have been a part of this team, and I feel like I'm, sad to say, but you know, walking away with a whole lot of new knowledge and information, and this would never have, anything like this, I never would have imagined something like this would have been possible 3 years ago. So I'm just glad to get this out into the world, and this is something I feel like I could probably only do at UT. So really, really grateful for that. My studio mates, past and present, I love you so much. Thank you for always supporting me. I feel really grateful for our team. Of course, folks that have graduated as well, really great resources and great friends as well. And then finally, friends, family, my partner Brent, of course, and I just want to thank all of you for coming. So I'm happy to take questions, but otherwise that's all I have for the presentation.